Hey everyone, it's Gigi. Welcome back to Gigi's World and the second video of the Let's Make a Top Together series. If you haven't seen the first video to make the base mesh of the top, go ahead and check that out so you'll be able to use this video for the next step. Where we left off in the previous video was making a bow, and remember we did not duplicate it or the strap just yet so that our UV unwrapping could be simpler. First, what is UV unwrapping and why is it important? It's basically laying your mesh out flat as if you were making an actual pattern for something. It's like a blueprint. So your computer or programs will know exactly how to lay out your texture on your mesh. If your UV pieces are overlapping, it will create a black spot on your mesh. If you move a piece on your UV map after unwrapping without unwrapping again, your texture will not show up in the correct spot on your mesh, and unwrapping your mesh incorrectly may also cause some warping on your texture. So it's very important to get this part right. So let's start making our seams. We want to have seams where they make the most sense for each piece and for them to be in more hidden places. It's not as big of a deal on things like the strap and bow, but wherever your seam is, there will be a line of demarcation. It can be corrected, but it's best to make things simpler for yourself later on. Let me go ahead and put these screencast keys on for you, and I'm going to select the top and go into edit mode, and I'm just going to alt right click to select this whole edge over here. I'm going to do the same. You'll select all the outer edges, and you can do this part one at a time if you would like, as far as selecting one edge and then making a seam. So let me show you how to do that. After you've selected the edges that you need to, hit U on your keyboard and mark seam. So now I'm going to do that for the top pieces up here too. U, mark seam, U, mark seam. I'm also going to make some minor corrections here just because I see that the mesh is off slightly, and that's a little bit better. Alright, going back into object mode, let's select the strap, and it's still a curve, and you can tell because this right here, your object data properties, you still see where you can fix the geometry, etc., etc. So what we're going to do is, while still in object mode, hit W, convert to mesh. Do the same for your bow. If you would like to make a copy of this, go ahead and do that. What I would suggest for the bow, since it's in several pieces, just select all of these pieces and join them together. Control J. But I do think that you need to convert it to a mesh first. We did do that in the last video if I remember correctly. So now that that's done, I'm going to go back to this strap, edit mode, and I'm going to turn off the body just so that it's easier for me to see what I'm doing here. And I'm going to alt right click one ring of edge loops right here, and it's on the inside part, as I mentioned earlier, because I don't want there to be a line of demarcation on the outside of the strap. So let's go ahead and hit U and mark that seam. Object mode, and let's select the bow. Go back into edit mode. So what you'll do, because this is in so many pieces, just go through each piece and alt right click so that you get the back edge of these bows. U, mark seam, U, mark seam. For these pieces down here, for the little knots, I am going to try to select an inner part of those as well. If you need to, you can hover over another part of the mesh. Just select the vertex first or click out. Hover over another part of that mesh, L, to highlight only that piece, and H to hide. That way you can see the inside of the rings a little bit better. And to bring that back, whenever you've marked your seams, you'll go to Mesh, this Mesh tab up here, Show Hide, and then Reveal Hidden or Alt-H. Okay? So let's do this again for the other little rings. And mark those seams too. Zooming all the way in. Mark seam, and it looks like this piece didn't get joined, but that's okay. I'll go ahead and mark that seam and then join it. There we go. Back into object mode, and I'm just going to shift right click, Control J to join. Let's make sure everything is marked. All our seams are marked. And the reason why I'm not marking the seams on the sides of this top is because the top is already split down the front. I just want this to be one singular piece, and it doesn't make that big of a difference on the top. Even though these little pieces are clearly separate, we can add in that detail when it comes to sculpting. And if you want the pattern to be slightly off, as if it was sewn together, we can also do that when it comes to texturing instead of doing that now. And I realized I didn't put a seam on the inside of this little middle piece on the bow as well. All done. Let's try that again. UV editing, A, U, unwrap. And this is what our mesh looks like, completely flat, except some of our island pieces are extremely small. The great thing about the UV editing tab is that you can scale, rotate, and move your UV islands along the X and Y axes like in layout or modeling mode, and you can move it freely. If you hover over L to select one island, you can just grab it and move it around. But you cannot move along the Z axis. Just a disclaimer if you try and wonder what's going on. So let's go ahead and move these pieces off to the side. And once again, I'm just hovering over and hitting L on my keyboard to select those individual pieces. I'm going to G to grab them, move them off to the side of the UV map so that I can position everything in a way that makes sense. I'm going to drag and select all these pieces down here and scale them up a lot, because of course it doesn't make sense for them to be that small. And I'm going to drag those off to the other side. Keep in mind that we are going to move all of these pieces back to the UV map, but if you forget to move any of these pieces back to the map, they will not be textured. It'll show up black. Or when you import them into, for example, Second Life, and you have on alpha blending, it'll show up transparent and you won't see it at all. So let's go ahead and deselect And this piece right here, this is our top. Hovering over, selecting L. We're just going to move that around, scale that up, and rotate it by 90 degrees. Just hitting E to enter and lock that in. And I want this piece to be pretty big, just because it makes it easier to make edits to the texture in Substance Painter, or if you would prefer Photoshop or GIMP if you know how to texture in those. And I'm just going to do the same for all of these other pieces. Let's move all these. And I don't like how this cinches in so much. At the bottom, I would rather for it to be a little more uniform. So what I'm going to do for this piece is turn on proportional editing, and I did discuss that a little bit in the previous video, I believe. I'm going to hit O on my keyboard to turn that on, or I can just select this little button that looks like a target. And I'm going to select this edge, alt right click, and scale. And I'm scrolling downward on my mouse so that more of that piece is affected with the editing. So I'm just going to scale that up until I get something that I like. This will still work well for when we get to texturing. Hovering over, selecting L, and I'm going to, let's turn off proportional editing. Scale this so that it fits nicely on the UV map, and I just rotated that by 90 degrees. So it can go, I'm going to put it up here, just because of where the top of our stop is. And these pieces, because they're so close together, I'm sure that this is the bow area. We can check to make sure by using UV sync selection. So let's hit that button, and I'm going to hover over L, and you see it lights up over in the 3D viewport as well. So we know exactly what we're looking at on our UV map. And like I said before, it was the bow. So I'm going to rotate by 90 degrees, enter, and move this towards the bottom, just to lay everything out in a very organized fashion. I'm going to turn off UV sync selection so that I can move things independently. As you can see, when I select a piece in the UV mapping area, it's selecting the other edge that it's connected to. And you won't always want or need that feature when you're UV unwrapping, so sometimes it's easier just to turn that off. Everything is going to disappear. That's okay, don't panic. Hover over the 3D viewport and hit A. Everything will show up again. So let's move these pieces just a little further apart. And I'm moving this along the y-axis. And I'm going to scale this along the x-axis just a smidge. And now for these little pieces over here, I'm going to scale all of these down. They don't need to be that big because they're very small on the mesh as well. They don't require that much detail. So we're just going to move those into place. And let's separate these two a little bit. As I mentioned, if you have anything overlapping, it can create a black spot on your texture whenever you load in your textures on Blender, you're baking, and you load them into Second Life or whatever program that you're using. So now our UV editing is done, our UV unwrapping is done. Let's go to layout again. Now that that's done, we can start making duplicates of the bow and the strap. The duplicate of each of these pieces will take on the exact texture as the original. The only way that that will be thrown off is if you add extra geometry to the duplicate copy. So as long as you leave the geometry the same, you'll be fine to have everything on the same UV island without it causing any issues. You just want to make sure that you don't go back and UV unwrap everything again, because once again that can cause some issues. You just want to stick with what we just did and use the original piece as your point of reference for your program to know, hey, this is what we're texturing and this is what every duplicate is supposed to look like. So let's go ahead and make our copies. I'm going to duplicate the strap first, and I already have the point of origin at the center of the 3D viewport. Well, not dead center, but you know what I mean. So that I can Shift B, duplicate, object, mirror, x-axis. So now we have two straps and they both will follow the same UV map. And we're going to duplicate the bows. I'm going to slide this down on the x-axis. Space them similarly to the top. Okay. And we're going to have to move these back some too. Grab Y. So there you go. And now that everything is UV unwrapped, you can move these bows around to create some variation using proportional editing. And you can also click on this drop down and select connect it only. That way you can move around very specific parts like that, and you see the rest of the bow isn't affected. And with proportional editing, you can do everything the same, like rotating, scaling, grabbing. Just be careful of how you're moving your mesh, because of course you're moving it from where it originally was, and it won't always be a perfect turn that you're making, or if you're moving it in a certain direction, it can start to get a little funky and like squish the mesh like you can see here. So you just want to be aware of that when you are moving things around. So I'm just going to rotate that a little, bring this out, and you can do this until you are content with the look. And for the sake of the video, I'll go ahead and move along with this. What we're going to do now is change our materials. That way, when we go to texture, we can have our top, our base of the top as a specific material. Let's say we wanted this print, and we'll have the strings as a plain like cotton or satin fabric. So what we'll do is select the mesh, go over to material properties, hit new, And let's go to our viewport shading. That way we can see what the material is being changed to. Now this part, it doesn't matter what color you choose. All we're doing is just separating the materials. So we can name this top base, and let's go to the string, new, top, straps, and bows. Feel free to name it whatever you want. Either way, they're going to be separated. You can color them however you want to for the time being as well. So I'm just going to make that just a bit of a darker color. Selecting the other pieces, and I'm just going to put in the correct material slots. Oops, let's see. There we go. Now it's named top base. Enter. You can also change the materials before you make your duplicates. It just cuts out a tad bit more work. It doesn't really matter what order you do it in. It's up to you. And I want the bows and the straps to be on the same material slot. Of course, if you want each bow to be completely different or your strap to be different, that's entirely up to you. And once everything is on the same material slot, aside from the top, of course, you can alter the color however you want, and it'll do the same for each piece that's connected to that material. If this video was helpful, go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell so you get a notification for the next one in this series, and like and comment so that I know how the series is going for you, and so other people can find this video and learn how to mesh as well. Thank you for watching. Catch you next time. Bye.